Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Weekly Waypoint. Today we are playing Pokemon Sword, and we're doing a Dynamax adventure because I still haven't got all of the legendaries from the Dynamax adventures in this game, and I would like to do so. If you couldn't tell, I am on a bit of a Pokemon tear lately. I actually finished Pokopia this week, which is a little wild because how often do I buy a game, start it and finish it within a reasonable time frame like that? I finished it before some of the people I'm talking to have finished it, although to be fair, finishing the game isn't necessarily like the thing to aim for. It's not a super story based game, although there is a worthwhile story to it. It's very sandboxy and a lot of people have spent a lot of time just working on their villages and stuff instead of progressing, which is totally valid, and I did spend a bunch of time doing that too. But I finished the game around 35 hours in, and ever since I've been working on some of my villages too. I'm being vague on purpose because I don't want to give away any spoilers. I do think that my attention is starting to wander away from Pokopia now, even though there's still a bunch of stuff I want to do in that game, projects I want to work on and things I want to unlock and see and do. At the same time, I've spent a lot of time in this game recently, but it's so good. It's my game of the year so far. Obviously, I'm not going to say it's my game of the year until December 31st comes around, because something may well just come along and topple it, but you know, I'm not going to force myself to keep playing it just because I've got this weird idea that I've got to get like full completion and unlock every single Pokemon and stuff. This will probably be a game that I come back to every now and again and tinker around in. But yeah, I'm wrestling with the fact that I've talked about Pokopia a lot recently, and so I don't just want to regurgitate things I've already said, but Pokopia is the game for people who love Pokemon, like legitimately each and every single little guy and gal who exists in these games. They all have a personality and you can build them little houses and watch them interact with each other and stuff, and it's just so fulfilling and wonderful. And at the same time, it's a new take on the Pokemon world, which is legitimately quite captivating. There is a mystery about where you are and why the world is the way that it is, and you know, it kind of unfolds as you play through the game, and it's not, you know, it's not Final Fantasy XIV or anything, but it's pretty fun, it's interesting, it's cool. Again, especially if you're a long-time Pokemon fan. And I don't think Pokopia was made to be a 30th anniversary celebration game, but that's certainly how it feels. But yeah, I've also been playing Pokemon Violet's DLC, I finished the Teal Mask, I think I talked about that last week, and I'm onto the Indigo Disc. I've done one of the 4 Elite Four trainer fights, and it was a surprisingly I wouldn't say difficult fight, but, you know, I wasn't as assured of my victory as I normally am in trainer fights in these games, so that was pretty cool. I've also been continuing my Pokemon Fire Red playthrough. This is probably the main thing that's lapsed in terms of, you know, Pokemon things that I've been doing, but I will get back to it pretty soon in a pretty major way. I want to finish that game, and like, I really want to try and go for Pokedex completion in that game because I've never actually done that. The only Pokedex I've ever completed in a Pokemon game has been Pokemon Diamond, and that was because you only needed to see the Pokemon in that game to count them in the Pokedex, whereas obviously in previous titles you needed to collect them, and in later titles, while you could still see them as like partial Pokedex completion, you still needed to collect them, so it was a bit of a different game in that regard. And I remember working so hard on that project, by the way, and then getting to the end game, which was kind of meh, and being like, well, don't really know what I want to do now. I've mentioned this before, but I've never spent a significant portion of time in the end game of a Pokemon title until Pokemon Sword onwards. And speaking of Pokemon Sword once again, I spent last night hatching a bunch of Feebas to Wonder Trade Away, or Surprise Trade Away it's called in that game, because then it trade evolves into Milotic, and it would be cool to send a bunch of Milotics to people. I like sending trade evolutions over Wonder Trade or Surprise Trade because it's just nice when you get one. I actually got one back. I got Swirlix, which evolves into Slurpuff when you trade it, which I did not know. And I, again, have not completed the Pokedex in Pokemon Sword, and this is a pretty fun way of trying to do so because most of the stuff you get back is just kind of trash. It's just, you know, a Squavet or something, like a level 5 Squavet someone found, and they're like, whoa, this surprise trade feature is cool, I wonder if I'll get a legendary. And so the main thing is I'm trying to just get these Milotics out to new players, because that's a pretty fun Pokemon to have on your party early game, right? But then Also, at the same time, yeah, I'm curious to see what I get back. It kind of scratches the same itch as playing like a Pokemon randomizer, emulation ROM hack, but obviously it's official and stuff. So also, it's fun to try and collect Pokemon of foreign languages because they get their own Pokedex entries, and you can keep them, and you got better, shiny chances if you hatch eggs from them. So that's cool as well. And I was keeping count while I was hatching these Milotics, because the Milotic I have myself is itself a foreign one, so I do get increased shiny odds, but I don't have a shiny charm in this game yet, so I mean, it's kind of a moot point really, but it still increases my shiny odds by a little bit, so I might as well keep count. And yeah, that was just a fun thing to do while listening to a podcast, just to, get into this routine of hatching eggs. I had 2 boxes full of Feebas, and I haven't actually surprise traded them all away yet, so I've got, if I want to do some surprise trading, I've got some stock. Of course, every now and again you do get a hacked Pokemon. It's far more prevalent in Scarlet and Violet right now, because those are the most recent games which have a surprise trade feature in them. At least I don't think ZA has a surprise trade feature in it. And, but yeah, it's still got like a shiny level 100 Charizard, which I'm going to release, because hacked in Pokemon are just fake Pokemon. They're not, there's no story behind getting them, there's nothing interesting about them, it's just someone put some data into a computer. And it's like, well, I feel nothing, so bye. They also always have a nickname, which is just the name of the website that they came from, and that's so lame. I really wish Game Freak would address hacked Pokemon, at the very least, by just banning, like, .com at the end of names, Like, I know they would just nickname them as something else, but find a way, like, find the most popular Pokemon hacking websites and just ban them as Pokemon nicknames, and then when they change names, keep up with that shit and continue banning them as nicknames. It'll never be a perfect system, but it's just, it's a little soulless, and I don't like that in a Pokemon game, which is all about soul. At least Soul Silver was. Hey, like, yes, I know Pokemon are all just data at the end of the day and they're not real, but if that's really a counterpoint that you're willing to argue, you're overlooking the reason people enjoy fiction in the first place, and that's immersing yourself in a fantasy world, right? So yeah, kind of a moot point in my opinion. And even if they are just data, I can attach sentimental value to data. But hey, real quick, before I get on to the next thing I've been playing, what was the thing that I was listening to while I was hatching all of these eggs? Well, it was an interview that Jeff Kaplan did that is 5 hours long, and I've listened to the entire interview because I can't get enough of learning about the origins of like World of Warcraft and the design intentions and the problems that the team had and behind the scenes stuff about Blizzard. It's so fascinating to me, both the highs and the lows. And Jeff Kaplan, for those of you who don't know, was the lead on Overwatch and the creation of that game. He was also part of Project Titan, which crashed and burned. As we all know, Overwatch rose from the ashes of Project Titan. And before that, he was the lead of the World of Warcraft team around the time of Wrath of the Lich King and was on the project ever since its inception. And he also goes into detail about how he got involved with Blizzard, and before that, like what his life was like before that, and his love for EverQuest, and his difficulty trying to become a writer, and his failure in that department, and it's just legitimately fascinating stuff. But as he's talking about Overwatch and like, the intention behind Overwatch and what it needed to be and where it came from, there's some stuff I already knew because Jason Schreier wrote a very in-depth behind-the-scenes book about Blizzard. Is it last year or the year before? I read through that. And it's really good, by the way. It's called The Rise, Fall and Future of Blizzard Entertainment. There's some even further additional context here that Jeff Kaplan gives about like the idea that they only had 2 weeks to kind of like come up with the pitch for Overwatch, and they were told it was a game that they had to create and deliver within 2 years, and it had to be heavily monetizable, and they needed a mobile strategy, and they just kind of bullshitted a lot of that stuff, which I highly respect. And honestly, Jeff Kaplan's exit from Blizzard always stank of something, not right, and I've been waiting basically for this ever since. Like, Jeff Kaplan's not a personal hero of mine specifically, but I knew of him as a developer and a personality, and I liked him Overwatch has never been my absolute favorite game of all time, but I've spent a long time playing it, especially around 2017, 2018. And so, yeah, it was really fascinating to hear his perspective unfiltered, because it was pretty unfiltered. The advice he gave at the end of a podcast to upcoming game devs was something along the lines of, don't sell yourself to a greedy corporation, you are the golden goose. Value yourself more. And oh boy, if that's not a condemnation of his treatment at Blizzard, I don't know what is. But he talks about how his breaking point was the CFO at the time, which Jason Schreier writes about in the book as being basically installed by Bobby Kotick, from Activision. The CFO at the time telling him, if the game doesn't make this amount of money every year, I will lay off 1,000 staff every year and it will be your fault. And it's like, god damn, holy shit, that is evil. That's legitimately evil. And there's very few more poignant demonstrations in video games of a development company which started with passion for making games and has ended up in a place which is a corporation and it's a business about making games. And there are still amazing developers at Blizzard making amazing games which I love, but they're very much doing so under the duress of an oversight. And I wish Blizzard could buy itself out of that, because they were owned by Activision, which was really bad for them, and they're owned by Microsoft now, which is going to get more and more bad for them as time goes on, I'm sure. But yeah, it's a fascinating interview. I would recommend it to anyone who enjoys Blizzard games. I will say, I don't love the interviewer. I think he starts getting the AI to summarize things Jeff Kaplan is saying and then parrots them back to him, and I'm like, what are we doing, dude? But at the same time, he did ask some decent questions, and maybe he was just being agreeable, but he was agreeing with some things Jeff was saying that I found pretty poignant, so shrug. But yeah, I mean, I listened to all 5 hours of it, and it didn't feel like I was sitting and listening to something for 5 hours, so, I mean, I listened to it in bits and bobs, but you know what I mean. Anyway, let's get to talking about a game which I have started playing, which is Final Fantasy 7. I'm playing Final Fantasy 7. I did give this a go once before, when it was on Xbox Game Pass a few years ago, and I even put out a video of my experiences in it, and I didn't click with it so much. I was really surprised by the active time battle combat. It was my very first time seeing it, but I've now played some of Final Fantasy 4, and I know a little bit more about, I've played 1 to 3 in the meantime as well, so I know a little bit more about the general concept of a Final Fantasy game, even though they're all so different, especially from 7 onwards. And so that's not a hurdle for me to clear anymore. And also, I did pick up all of these Final Fantasy games on Steam, so I might as well play them, right? My initial plan was to play 4, and then 5, and then 6, and then 7, but I'm stalling a little bit on 4, and the mood struck me to go and check out 7, and if the mood strikes me to play a game, and I don't let myself play a game because of some arbitrary reason of playing a different game, then why am I even playing games? Plus, I figured, I picked up Pokopia when I wasn't originally planning to, and really loved it and played it to completion. And I picked up Isaac Asimov's first robot book and read that through to completion pretty quickly. You can go hear my thoughts about that on my other channel, Kritigri Talk Stories. So I thought, why not try for a third thing in a row to check out on a whim and find out that it's peak, because I hear so much about how peak Final Fantasy 7 is, and that feels like a pretty safe take. But I know Final Fantasy fans, so let me just say, I know there are some people who think that Final Fantasy 7 is grossly overrated. There are some people who think it's even underrated. I'm not going into 7 with any of this kind of baggage of someone who's been a Final Fantasy fan for decades and decades, right, and lived through 7's advent or prefers 10 or whatever. I got into Final Fantasy with 14, and that was around the time that the Endwalker expansion was dropping for the first time, or a little bit before that, so I'm actually approaching 7 with a pretty fresh set of expectations. I've also played some of the remake. I've played about 8 hours of the remake, so there's that as well, to be fair. But other than that, I'm approaching 7 with a pretty fresh set of expectations, just knowing that it's beloved. And so far, I'm 3.5 hours in. I'm not going to give any spoilers or anything. I know it's a very old game, but some people like me haven't played it. But so far, it's extremely compelling, and the vibes are immaculate. I'm having a really good time. When I get into playing it, I don't want to put it down. I don't want to stop playing it. I want to see what happens next, but also I quite enjoy the battles. For the first time, I'm enjoying the active time battle system, and that's interesting because it doesn't really do anything differently from 4 in that respect, or at least not the pixel remaster version of 4. But I don't know, for some reason it just feels more manageable. It feels better. I don't feel like I'm being rushed into making decisions. I do have a pause mode on, but I have a pause mode on with 4 as well. I still feel that way a bit. I can't quite put my finger on what's different about it, but I'm really enjoying it. I like the materia system. It's fairly simple, but it's kind of just like buying spells like in Final Fantasy 1 and you know, equipping them on people, but it makes a bit more sense within the lore. And so far I really like the characters and the soundtrack. Oh my god. I know Final Fantasy VII is famous for its soundtrack, but there isn't a single track that misses. And I'm not being hyperbolic here. I have not listened to a single track in that game that I have wanted to stop, or that I haven't been disappointed when I've transitioned into a different area and the music has stopped and then another track has started and I've loved that track. It's so perfect for what it is. And I've heard some of these tracks before, but when you're hearing them within the context of this world that you're immersed in Midgar, it's just exquisite. It's so good. It's highly regarded for a reason. And while I have been spoiled on some of the larger story beats that are to come because this game is old and everyone expects everyone to have played it by now, a pretty major thing just happened which I was not expecting and didn't know happened, and it did shake me a little bit, if I'm being honest, and I'm really invested in the story and the world, so I guess we'll see how that continues to develop in future weeks. It's just, there are some fantasy worlds which are so rich and have such a unique vibe to them that I just fall in love, head over heels. I would point to this game so far, although it might be a little bit early to call it on that level, but that's how I'm feeling at the minute. I would point to Final Fantasy XIV Shadowbringers specifically for doing that too. I would point to the Mistborn book series by Brandon Sanderson, and maybe Sun Eater as well by Christopher Rocchi, although that's slightly less unique, but it is still pretty unique in terms of things I've read so far. There are just some worlds out there that are made across any medium which are just so gripping, and Final Fantasy feels like it's falling into that for me. And this shouldn't be news to anyone who's played the game before, but yeah, it's pretty damn good. By the way, the only Final Fantasy game I'm missing from my collection is 13, and that frequently goes on sale for like £4. I'll pick it up at some point. I did check it out on Game Pass. I only played a little bit of it though, and I did not come out with a good opinion about it, but I will try it again at some point. I can't really trust my opinion on any RPG I played through Game Pass because it never felt like I really owned that experience or like was fully invested in it because I didn't own it and wasn't able to approach it in my own time frame at my own pace because I knew it could leave the service at any moment. And so yeah, not just that as well, but like there were also so many other RPGs to check out which could leave the surface at any moment, and so I really struggled, you know, keeping my attention on anything. I always struggle keeping my attention on anything, but in regards to playing through RPGs, certainly Xbox Game Pass was a bad idea for that. As I've said before, it was a good idea for like multiplayer games and stuff like that, but yeah, for my personal attention span, RPGs on Game Pass was a bad idea. But all of this kind of came about after last week's comment that I made about, you know, being excited for Pillars of Eternity's turn-based mode so that I could try that game again in a manner that I might enjoy a bit more. It got me thinking about, like, what RPGs do I own that have that kind of darker vibe to them that I would like to play? And while it's a different genre of RPG, Final Fantasy VII is what I ended up settling on. I should also mention World of Warcraft Midnight because I've still not finished leveling through that. I'm still in Zulaman. It's still not really vibing with me, that zone. While we're talking about fantasy vibes, right? I mean, we all just have subjective tastes and stuff, and I guess Zolaman isn't doing much for me. It is a pretty zone, and there are elements of it that I do like, but yeah, I need to continue playing through that. But at the same time, again, I'm trying to get away from this idea that I need to play through it because it's a new WoW expansion, and it's who I am. I like WoW, I play through the expansions when they're new. This is already the longest I've ever taken to play through a new WoW expansion, And yeah, I don't know, maybe I'll take a break from it and get back to it later. I'm not sure. I currently have a few people tempting me back to Star Wars The Old Republic, which I haven't played in a hot second, and still have a bunch of story content I've never touched, such as most of the expansions and most of the class stories, so that's tempting to do as well. Maybe this time next week I'll be talking all about SWTOR. That's very much an in-the-moment decision I'm kind of making right now. I remember I was really enjoying the Sith Inquisitor story because you could just be deliciously maniacally evil in that, and there are very few games which actually allow you to be deliciously maniacally evil. But it's been so long now, I feel like I'd need to recreate that character and restart the experience. And also I feel like if I want to play SWTOR, I want to subscribe to it. Because whenever I've tried to play it without being subscribed to it, I've just not really been able to get into it as much, so yeah, I don't know. But yeah, anyway, as you can see here, things have not been going too well with Zygarde. I decided to include this gameplay footage just because Dynamax Adventures, sometimes you can spend 20 minutes trying your best, you can spend 20 minutes and it looks like it's going well, and then at the end of the day, you fail. So, spoiler alert, we're about to fail. I'm not mad though when that happens. I think that's good game design if I'm not mad about failing a Dynamax adventure and it's taken 20 minutes, because you get commiseration Pokemon. You get to choose any of the Pokemon that you played with or captured throughout the experience, and they have a chance to be shiny as well, and I actually did get a shiny Pokemon out of this pretty recently. Not in this video though. But anyway, that's going to do it for this episode of the Weekly Waypoint. Thank you very much for checking it out. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and leave a comment down below about anything I mentioned. Do you play SWTOR? Do you like Final Fantasy VII? So on and so forth. Other than that, I will catch you in whatever I make next.